For some, killing is an addiction, like food, alcohol, sex, or drugs. Each victim makes the next one easier. Is the man behind the murders I have for you this week the most prolific serial killer on record, whose name you have likely never heard of? Let's sort out the dark and sadistic details. My name is M. William Phelps. I'm an investigative journalist and the New York Times best-selling author of dozens of true crime books. I've dedicated the past 26 years of my life to helping families of the missing and murdered. Join me. We're crossing the line. Just a quick warning up front, this episode will contain graphic details and brutal crimes. It's March 11th, 1983. Two Orange County, California Sheriff's Department investigators, working on a horrific series of murders, including the discovery of body parts found all over the county, totaling almost 4 dozen potential victims, knock on the door of a 32-year-old man. The guy's name is out there, but I am going to hold it back because this man has been put through enough at this point already, so why add to it? Let's call him Stephen. Stephen has kept a secret for 13 years. As a 13-year-old boy, Stephen had run away from home. He had what we might call a rebellious streak in him to hang around the wrong people and make the wrong decisions. All of us have been 13 years old at one time and can relate, I am sure. It was March 1970, a very different time in Orange County and all of America. Stephen was roaming around Westminster, a smaller town on the western edge of the county. He had found his way over to Huntington Beach one day and ran into a shabbily dressed, well-spoken, seemingly nice guy who called himself Randy. Randall Kraft. Kraft was balding with dirty blonde hair and one of those Ron Burgundy-type bushy mustaches. He has the dark eyes of a crow and a rather birdish look to him overall. Kraft was born in Long Beach in 1945, and so he's about 25 years old at the time he meets Stephen. Kraft has 3 sisters and is the only son in his family. For the most part, Kraft's father was not around the household much, always traveling for work, and his mother worked several jobs to keep the family from poverty. They were not doing all that bad, socially, economically, and class-wise. They lived a fairly normal life in a fairly modest home. Opal, Kraft's mother, seemed to find time to spend with her 4 kids, take them places, and make sure they had whatever they needed. In fact, she brought the kids to church on Sundays, instilled values in them, and became a deacon at the church. Kraft's teachers quickly saw something in the boy. He seemed to harbor an intelligence more than most of his classmates and wound up in accelerated classes when he made it into junior high. In high school, Kraft develops a passion for politics and becomes a committed, ardent Republican, and soon begins talking about running for a Senate seat after college. He involves himself in the political clubs in school, debate teams, and begins bringing home straight A's. And his classmates describe the kid as kind, bright, intelligent, friendly. He also excels at tennis and becomes a breakout star on the varsity team. So, by all of those standards, Randall Kraft had a good life, was raised in a solid home, and had dreams and goals like many of his peers, who saw him going places and doing big things with his life. Many around Kraft during his high school years suspect that Kraft is harboring a secret, however. This at a time when one did not go around announcing this specific secret about themselves. Kraft says he knew by then, with certainty, that he was a gay man. Finally, he graduates 10th in a class of nearly 400, and he sets off for Claremont Men's College pursuing a degree in economics. Looking at all of this, one might reckon the guy was on his way toward what seemed to be a productive professional life. Now, going back to Stephen. In his mid-30s, he lets the two investigators into his apartment, and they all sit down. It's 1983, if you recall. The investigators ask Stephen about a police report they had located in which Stephen described being attacked by Randy Kraft back in 1970. They asked Stephen to go through the attack once again, if he could. Knowing Randy Kraft as well as they do by now, these investigators sense there is more to the story Stephen has not divulged. Stephen admits he was violently sexually assaulted by Kraft, but that he had never told anyone. When they asked him why, he says, "How do you tell something like that to your mother? Something you don't understand yourself." He explains that Kraft drugged him, and when Kraft made the forceful advances on him, he had no control over himself and could not protect himself in any way. He tells the investigators that whatever drug Kraft had given him, it turned him into what he says was, quote, a rag doll. When Kraft met Stephen on the street, he offered him a place to stay and enticed the boy by telling him he had a woman at his apartment Stephen was welcome to have sex with. "You can live with me," Kraft says, realizing Stephen is a runaway. After drugging him, Kraft raped the kid repeatedly and gave him savage beatings in between. Stephen finally came out of it and managed to escape after Kraft had gone to work one morning. A passerby found the boy, filthy and beaten up, disheveled, and took him to the hospital. When police interviewed him, Stephen told them Kraft had beaten and drugged him, but kept the secret of the sexual assault to himself. "I feared no one would believe me, and I felt ashamed," Stephen said later, which was a common way for victims to feel back then. The problem police ran into with arresting Kraft back in 1970, after Stephen reported being drugged and beaten, became that Stephen admitted he had voluntarily taken the pills Kraft offered him, and lo and behold, police went into Kraft's apartment without first getting a search warrant. So that violation and Stephen's willingness to take the drugs forced the prosecutor's hand, and no charges could be filed. You know, I want to say, I have been studying serial killer cases now for about 2 decades. When I dig deeply into them, I often find that there are a lot of what-ifs, which could have led to saving lives. But for whatever reason, the investigative stars did not align. Because had Kraft been arrested then and jailed, although I believe he still would have gone on to kill once he was released, who knows if he would have been caught after 1 or 2 murders and not gone on to kill upwards of what some investigators believe is about 67 victims over a 12-year period. Before Kraft committed that sexual assault on Stephen, he had been in the Air Force, which he had enlisted in just after graduating college. He became a supervising manager in the military and made rank of airman first class. He decided while in the Air Force to come out to his family as the gay man he was, telling them in a letter. Both parents disapproved, with his mother offering a slight bit of understanding. But Kraft's father, a man's man cut from a 1940s and 50s straight-laced cloth, became enraged and for a time basically disowned his son. Kraft felt rejected by his own family, alone and isolated, unable to live the life he saw for himself. Ultimately, Dad calmed down, and although he never accepted his son's sexuality, Randall Kraft was involved once again in the family. It's one of those situations where nobody talked about it. They went on like he'd never said a word. Inspired by that admission to his family, Kraft went to his Air Force superiors in July 1969, just a year before committing the sexual assault on Stephen, and told them he was gay. So they kicked him out under a general discharge on medical grounds. Kraft didn't like this. He sued the military. But the Air Force did not change his status, and so he moved on. Living with his parents now, he gets a job as a bartender at a popular gay bar in the Long Beach area. And this is when the real darkness begins. It's 1971, and Kraft has put that sexual assault behind him. But he has other plans and choices that will change the lives of hundreds of people. This, mind you, as Kraft enrolls in graduate school and decides he wants to become a teacher. As he does that, investigators in California are baffled when bodies begin showing up around Orange County, mostly on the side of roadways and near beaches. Bodies of young males brutalized, tortured, raped, murdered, and dismembered. Let's take our first break and come right back. You are listening to Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps, a true crime podcast. Randall Kraft finds a job in 1971 driving a forklift for the Arrowhead Water Company near his home in Huntington Beach. This type of blue-collar work seems below Kraft's intelligence, and he has no trouble letting people know this. He doesn't see himself at the job long. So he digs in and now sets his sights on California State University at Long Beach and becoming a teacher. While he is studying at California State, Kraft gets into his first real relationship with a man who is 4 years younger. He met the guy on campus who is also studying to become a teacher. Kraft doesn't know it at this point, of course, but his boyfriend will soon contract the HIV virus and develop AIDS. Kraft says later that at this stage of his life, he is finally living how he wants to. Another interesting fact, Kraft takes a standard intelligence or IQ test and scores 129, which is close to genius level. A bit entitled, he views himself as someone who deserves more than he has been given. Near this time, Kraft begins to hang out at the local gay bars in the Orange County area. One particular place, the Stables, is right there in Long Beach, and Kraft becomes a regular. Let's switch gears here for a moment, and as all of this is going on in Kraft's life, we'll step away for a minute. It's October 1971. Someone is driving along the Ortega Highway, a scenic 30-mile, two-lane mountain road connecting San Juan Capistrano in Orange County to Lake Elsinore. This is a gorgeous roadway up through the hills and mountainous terrain of California, where you'd come across those sharp, switchback-like curved roadways and awe-inspiring views of the Santa Ana Mountains. The driver sees something startling just off the side of the road. They pull over. It's the nude body of a young male. The young man is handsome, in a James Dean sort of way. Slicked black hair, cleft on his sharp chin, a Hollywood smile, the curious gaze of an actor, and thick, dark eyebrows. His body is severely decomposed and found at the bottom of a ravine just next to the highway. Being 1971, there is no way to determine in any reliable manner what happened to him. They do ultimately identify the man as Wayne Joseph Duquette, a 30-year-old bartender at the stables. Wayne was last seen alive back on September 20th. The autopsy reveals he has a high level of alcohol in his system, and his death is ruled undetermined, but likely from acute alcohol poisoning. I'm not sure how they came to this conclusion when the guy was found naked and his clothing missing, but this is early days of murder investigation as we know it today, when a gay man found on the side of the road was likely shamed and blamed and marginalized. So sadly, a lot less effort went into finding out what happened to him. Cold and harsh and unbelievable, I realize, but that is the truth of the matter. Wayne grew up in Lynn, Massachusetts, and went out to Santa Ana, California in 1969, just 2 years before his death. He was well-liked, and reports claim he was friendly and one of those guys who could make anyone feel good about themselves. Now, back to Randall Kraft's life. From Arrowhead Water Company, Kraft gets himself a job as a teacher's aide for the Long Beach Unified School District. As he works his way through learning the ropes of teaching, year after year, bodies and body parts begin showing up around Orange County in places where Kraft would have traveled and certainly had access to. A man's leg in Long Beach, a John Doe at Huntington Beach, a man's left leg at Sunset Beach, which they verify had been previously frozen, a guy named Edward Moore near the freeway at Seal Beach, a man, Vincent Mestis, in the San Bernardino Mountains, a man's torso and right leg found in several public bathrooms near San Pedro, a John Doe along the Terminal Island Freeway. That's just from 1972 to 1973. In 1974, as Orange County forms a task force to deal with what is obviously a brutal serial killer at large, more bodies. Same areas, several of the same beaches, and along the same highways, all of them men. They'd find a body one day and, a few days later, find another. A month would go by, and then more bodies would be discovered a few weeks apart. Kraft soon gives up the teaching dream. Late into 1974, Kraft lands himself a job as a dispatcher for the Aztec Aircraft Company in Long Beach. A year into that job, Kraft is driving around one day, and he sees two men hanging out in a parking lot in the Belmont Shore region of Long Beach. Kraft loved nothing more than to drive around looking for young men, hitchhiking or walking or loitering. He would use that same MO he used back when he lured Stephen to his apartment with promises of partying and a place to hang out and stay. The two men, 19-year-old Keith Davin Crotwell and a 15-year-old boy with him, lean into the driver's side window of Kraft's vehicle after he pulls up. Kraft says he has some Valium and booze. "Do you want to go for a joyride?" he asks. They agree and get in the car. Kraft takes off and they tool around the same general area for a time, and then he drives back to the parking lot where he met both of them. There are several other men in the parking lot. Kraft pulls up, drags the boy out of the vehicle, and those standing around notice that Crotwell, still sitting in Kraft's car, looks rather drugged up, like a zombie, totally incoherent. Kraft then hurriedly gets back into the car and takes off with Crotwell. The boy dropped off was catatonic, one report noted. And the men in the parking lot wound up bringing him home, where he eventually slept off whatever he was on when Kraft dropped him off. When asked the following morning what the hell had happened, the boy said he could not recall anything. Total drug-induced amnesia. Keith Crotwell is never seen alive again. Months go by. Several teenagers are out on the 72nd Place jetty along the Long Beach Marina, just doing what kids do, exploring, looking for shells, and enjoying the water. As they are climbing the rocks, one of them sees something. What's that? They head over for a closer look. It's a skull. One news report claimed, quote, badly decomposed with rotting strips of creamy white flesh still attached to the brows and cheeks and temples. What can I say? True crime reporting in the 70s and 80s was rather salacious and very much catering to a ravenous tabloid media culture. They searched dental records against the skull, and with Keith Crotwell missing for several months, they come up with a match. It's definitely him. When Crotwell's friends from the parking lot where he had been hanging out that day he disappeared realized he was murdered, and the last time he was seen was with that creepy guy driving a Mustang, they wage a campaign to find the vehicle and the guy. And so they all head out and begin scouring Long Beach and the surrounding areas, looking for the elusive creep who drugged the young boy and took off with Keith Crotwell. Let's take another break and get into the capture of a prolific serial killer and the psychology driving this lunatic. You are listening to Crossing the Line with M. William Phelps. It doesn't take the group long to locate Kraft. Within the span of 5 days, they find the car, Kraft's Mustang. It's parked about a mile away from the parking lot where they all witnessed Kraft picking up Crotwell and the boy. Instead of confronting him, they instead go to the local police and report everything they know. Now we are back into that what-if territory I mentioned earlier. It seems to me, in many of the serial killer cases I have studied and investigated myself, these guys always catch a break which allows them to go back out into the world and commit more murder. I don't know what the hell it is. It's not their intelligence or how coy and devious and tuned into investigations they are. That's the myth we are sold. There is something else at play, I am convinced. That said, Kraft is brought in, and he sits down inside a dimly lit room with two investigators sitting across from him. I can buy that a guy with Kraft's obvious above-average intelligence, near genius level, could manipulate two seasoned cops, and that a man like him is always plotting and planning and able to come up with plausible explanations for situations and excuses for where he spends his time. But there is more to it than just that. By now, I should mention, Kraft had decided on a career in computer technology. He excels in this regard, learning all of the latest and greatest computer knowledge while training at some of the biggest and most advanced companies in California. So again, smart guy. These investigators know that Kraft killed Crotwell, but the prosecutor tells them they have absolutely nothing on the guy but circumstantial evidence and hearsay, along with testimony from a bunch of people who hang around parking lots, i.e., which I read into as gay men with no credibility. One more way to push the marginalized down deeper into feeling worse than they already do. In short, Kraft is not charged. He tells them that he did pick up Crotwell and the boy. He dropped the boy off. They all did drugs and drank some booze. He and Crotwell then took back off, drove around, and then his car broke down. He says he left Crotwell in the car and walked to get help. When he returned, Crotwell was gone. Today, that story would have been quashed by CCTV, no doubt about it. But in 1975, a killer could get away with making up a story like that, and there was no way to disprove it, unless you have witnesses or trace evidence, etc. As the years pass, guess what? More bodies and body parts are found along the same roadways and beaches. Only now, the victims are younger, and the torture seems more intense. And this goes back to the opening of the episode, where I talked about serial killers being addicts. Like a drug addict, as they kill and get away with it, they need to keep upping the thrill or high they get, and so they raise the stakes. Forgive the severity and darkness here a moment, and a warning that this will be hard to hear. But the strangled and maimed bodies investigators begin to find have various objects protruding out of their rectums. Their genitals dismembered, sometimes their chests, scrotums, noses, cheeks, faces, and even their eyes burned with a car cigarette lighter, and other disturbing ways of maiming them, for which there is no need to go into. If you're unfamiliar with the car cigarette lighter from back in the day, think of a small push-pop-like apparatus on the dashboard. You push in for a minute or two, and the coil inside of it heats up. So the lighter, essentially, becomes like a branding iron. This is what he was using to torture and maim those men. The point being here, this serial killer almost seemed to be killing the things that he saw himself as on the inside, punishing these poor souls for how he viewed himself. He has this internal rage for gay men for some reason. By the end of 1975, the total number of victims connected to one killer by that task force, with the FBI now involved, is 14. I could go year by year, up until 1983 when authorities say Kraft stopped killing, victim by victim, list all the ways in which Randall Kraft, who has never admitted to any of the murders, maimed and killed and tortured young men. But you can take a deeper dive online or in a book if you want that information. There is speculation he had an accomplice. Speculation he killed all over the county. I could do a 3-part series on Kraft, though a lot of it is redundant gore and violence, which will not get us closer to analyzing who he actually is. It's exploitive, serial killer fetish stuff that most would have a hard time hearing, I would think. It is thought that Kraft killed from about 1970 to 1983. Bodies all the way up the West Coast, into Oregon, and even other states, such as Michigan. Kraft began posing some of the bodies and strangling them with shoestrings and belts and ropes. Then, on May 14th, 1983, which takes us now back to that period when investigators speak with Stephen, a California Highway Patrol person spots a Toyota driving quite erratically on the 5 in Orange County, hits the cruiser lights, and pulls the vehicle over. After parking on the side of the road, the driver gets out and seems to toss something over the side of the roadway, and he kind of stumbles a bit. The guy's pants are unzipped and halfway down. He tells the officer his name is Randy Kraft. The officer looks inside the car. There's a man sitting. He's young and he is slumped over. And it appears Kraft tried to cover him up with his jacket and hide him. The officer knocks on the window to wake the guy up, but he seems to be out cold. So the trooper shakes him. Nothing. The trooper then slaps his cheek. Nada. Then, while checking his pulse, the trooper realizes in that moment the man's skin is cold to the touch and he has strangulation marks around his neck. The trooper also realizes the man's hands are bound and his genitals are exposed. Kraft is essentially caught in the act. So they arrest him for a DUI. And this is the moment when he acquires what will be his second infamous serial killer nickname. The first being the Freeway Killer. But this new name, the Scorecard Killer, is based on something they ultimately find inside his vehicle after he is arrested. Let's take our final break here. And then I want to come back and get into the psychology of Kraft and share with you what a good friend of mine, forensic psychologist Dr. Catherine Ramsland, has to say about him. The mind of the serial killer is all at once simple and also quite complex. And we do not understand the totality of it. Don't let any of those profilers or, quote, experts screaming in your ears tell you any different. If they do, they are lying. We need years more study on the brain of the psychopath and serial killer to fully grasp what it is that truly drives them to do the sick and twisted things they do. And, more importantly, what it is that makes them different. Because once we think we understand one, the next one comes along and blows that hypothesis to shreds. Professor of criminology, psychiatry, and psychology, Adrian Raine, is the leading authority on the biology of violence and my personal go-to when I want solid information about what is happening in the brains of psychopaths. Raine's book, The Anatomy of Violence, is brilliant in this regard, and Raine has conducted studies on the brains of diagnosed psychopaths, both dead and alive. In that book, Raine pinpoints an area of the psychopath's brain, at least the ones he has scanned and studied, as missing the love or empathy gene, for lack of a better way to explain it. He also writes about Randall Kraft in this regard under the chapter subtitle, How Violent Minds Malfunction. Forensic psychologist Dr. Catherine Ramsland told me Raine believes, and I agree, that Kraft is a born psychopath, that his murderous mind and extreme and violent tendencies are rooted more in biology than in the environment he grew up in. In other words, Kraft is missing the empathy and love gene. He just can't love. Doesn't know what it is, doesn't know how to do it. He's a cold SOB and probably doesn't understand himself why he is the way he is. That's the truth of the matter. There is no known trauma Kraft experienced, and for all intents and purposes, he had a fairly normal upbringing. Kraft did have a head injury during childhood, Dr. Ramsland noted, but not one that damaged his frontal cortex, she says. A psychiatrist testified in 1989 that a scan showed a brain abnormality that could affect Kraft's impulse control. And for me, there it is. a mixture of what is purported by Adrian Raine to be nature on top of having no control over his impulses. That's a deadly combination. Add to that the idea that Kraft called himself a conservative gay man. There could also be serious shame or self-hatred involved, which I touched upon earlier with regard to the ways in which Kraft's alleged victims were shamed and maimed and mutilated. Dr. Ramsland makes a great point to me when she says this. He'd been arrested for a sexual overture to an undercover vice officer, so he might have decided not to take that risk again. And so, what does he do? He starts killing those he wanted sex from or wanted to rape. Get rid of the witness and maybe torture and maim them beforehand. I asked Dr. Ramsland about the torture aspect of Kraft's murders. I'd say the need was to torture as a means of control, she says. Psychopaths love power and control. It stimulates them. Kraft was a guy that if you met him, you would see no issues with him. He could act the part rather perfectly and was intelligent enough to carry on intellectual conversations and make you feel like he was a great guy. Kraft's classmates adored the guy. And I mean this with absolute conviction. I read testimonial after testimonial applauding the guy's kindness and intelligence and all-around likability. One man later said, "We all agreed that if we had to pick 5 people in our class who would never, ever be accused as some type of murderer, Randy would be one of the 5. Everybody liked Randy, said another student, a female. I once had a crush on him. Nobody had any idea that Kraft was gay then. They were later shocked to hear that he had effectively come out. Even more horrified when he was later arrested for that DUI and charged with close to 20 murders. The scorecard killer part of Kraft's story comes from police finding a paper card in his vehicle with a coded list of 61 items on it. When they matched a lot of what he had written down up to potential victims, there seemed to be unmistakable similarities and connections. For example, he wrote Marine Head BP in one entry. One victim, a Marine, had been picked up hitchhiking in Buena Park and was decapitated. He had so many references to victims and places and ways in which his victims were murdered, investigators believed he was keeping a scorecard. I think record is a better word. But look, the record killer, that doesn't sell papers. They also found a number of items, trophies, he had taken from his victims. In the end, they matched over 40 code words from his list to individual victims. Many of them, this is important, were in the military, which one could argue was Kraft's way of getting back at the system that shunned him after he came out as a gay man. We will never know how many Kraft murdered, because my bet is, despite keeping a list, neither does he. On May 12, 1989, Kraft was found guilty of 16 counts of murder, 1 count of sodomy, and 1 count of emasculation. On August 11, 1989, he received the death penalty. 3 months later, on November 29th, he was sentenced to death and detained on death row at St. Quentin Rehabilitation Center. Kraft appealed his sentence, although his conviction and sentencing were upheld by the California Supreme Court on August 9, 2000. You see how long justice takes there? From 1989 to 2000. As of 2025, Kraft remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Men. He denies killing anyone. That's it for this week. Be safe. Be aware. Sources for this episode include Can a Serial Killer Have a Soulmate by Catherine Ramsland, published on her Substack page. Murder Convictions Baffle Old Friends, LA Times by Jeffrey Hicks, May 14th, 1989. The Anatomy of Violence, a book by Adrian Rain. Crossing the Line is executive produced by M. William Phelps, LLC, and Matthew Valentinus, Mom's Basement Management. Written by me, M. William Phelps. Audio mastering and mixing by Matt Russell. Music by Epidemic Sound. Original music written and performed by Thomas Mooney, Tom Phelps, and Matt Russell.